What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, January 16th, 2017. And, my voice is kind of in rough shape here, but I'm actually a lot better than I was on Friday and over the weekend. So if you'll just bear with me, we've got a show to do. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on him, which apparently somebody's already done. We're going to get to you in just a minute, but obviously it is Martin Luther King Day. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the evidence that it was, in fact, an assassination and a conspiracy and a cover-up. But let's first of all get this phone call out of the way. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Please try some of that Manuka honey with lemon and green tea.
Oh, been doing it all weekend. That and lots of nano silver.
Okay, my friend. A couple things. On this, I hate to bring this up again, but on that Israeli attack on Syria last week, what's happened to international law? There hasn't even been a response to this from the international community, from the UN. It just seems like, if you recall that baseball player, Manny Ramirez, people would say when he would do something crazy, he had some antic, they would say, oh, that's Manny being Manny. It just seems like they just shrug their shoulders and say that's Israel being Israel.
Well,
because it seems like there's nothing they can do.
Well, because with the recent exception of the Security Council vote on the illegal settlements, the world has come to understand there's nothing that can be done about Israel because the United States will always protect them in the Security Council. So they've just sort of gotten used to the idea that Israel can commit whatever atrocity and crime it wants to, and nothing can be done about it within the context of international law. And so, of course, the only other options are unconventional means, at which point Israel screams you're being an anti-Semite, terrorism, and all the rest of it. But yeah, Israel's just being Israel again. I think the reason nobody's doing anything about it from Russia and Syria's side is because this would open the door to a direct U.S. military intervention into Syria, or even worse, outright declaration of war saying you're attacking our ally Israel. And so Putin's going to kind of hold up on that. As solidly as Trump appears to be supporting Israel, I don't think Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin want a great war on their hands. And so I think things are going to cool down there. But that was the only reason for Israel to do it, to try and goad Syria and Russia into an attack on Israel to escalate the situation. And neither Putin nor Assad bought that.
Well, yeah, that's good. But, it would be nice to at least hear the head of the UN General Secretary, just making a comment or a condemnation of what they did. Mike, also, I'd like to hear from any callers from Arizona and South Carolina. What's in these voters' heads? Will they continue to reelect, or if they're not reelecting, or if it's done via fraud, John McCain and Lindsey Graham? We have these voters to thank if they are in fact voting for these two despicable men. I'd like to know what's in their heads. Why do they keep reelecting these two men to the Senate? Because they're causing not only this country but the whole world a whole lot of problems.
It's a very good question. I know I do get a lot of email from listeners in Arizona, not so much from South Carolina, just basically saying, we don't know how McCain keeps getting reelected because we don't know anybody who's voting for him. But, election fraud is obviously not just confined to the office of president.
Right. Oh, Mike, do you know anything about using lemons as deodorant?
I've never
encountered
a lemon that smelled bad to me. Well, I'll tell you this.
I saw a video. They said that it was used. You basically cut it in half and apply it to your underarms. They say it's a safe method, safe way of as a deodorant.
Well, I don't know whether it's really effective or not, or how it would work, but I do know that looking at the chemicals that are in the store-bought deodorants, there are so many things in there you should not allow on your body, and you'd be amazed what some of these companies get away with, because their attitude is, you're only putting this on your skin, therefore we don't have to test, we don't have to be sure about the safety. But that's nonsense. Stuff goes through the skin. And in fact, an experiment that will be very often done in first-year medicine to show how porous the body is to rub some garlic on the soles of your feet and see how long it takes before you taste it in your mouth. DMSO is known for being able to penetrate the skin and get into the underlying tissues, and it's used as a carrier for a lot of other medications for transdermal patches and so forth. So this idea that it doesn't matter if your underarm deodorant contains toxic, harmful chemicals, they're never going to go further than your armpit, that's ridiculous. Your whole lymphatic system is plugged in there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Oh, and last, Mike, you mentioned, I just wanted to make clear, you mentioned regarding the Winston Churchill bust that was in the Oval Office until George W. Bush left, and then Obama replaced it with the Martin Luther King bust. Yep. Did you say that it was a good thing that the Churchill bust was going to be back in the Oval Office?
No, what I said was that's a big place. Isn't there room enough for both of them?
Oh, yes. Okay, I agree. But I just feel like the Churchill bust really has no business being in the Oval Office. He was a political opportunist. He was a warmonger. He was responsible for the Lusitania. In a sense, he knew he wanted the weapons to be put on that vessel. I think Winston Churchill. Those who have especially the neocons, they have this romantic vision of him. That's what's sold to us by the corporate media. I just read an excellent piece on Churchill by the late Ralph Raico, and it's incredible. I mean, the things that you learn about this man. So Martin Luther King, that's another thing. But Martin Luther King, his bust is in the Oval Office, but it's a shame with Obama, it's all style and no substance. He's not following the principles of Martin Luther King.
No, he isn't. He really
during
isn't.
his 8 years in office.
It's kind of interesting because out of all the communications that passed between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, there's only one document that is still classified, and that was a message sent by Churchill to Roosevelt on December 6th, 1941. And for some reason, that one is still classified to this very day.
Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you, Mike. Hope you feel better.
I'm actually feeling better. It's just my voice is still shot, but I should be back to my normal obnoxious self within another day or two. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to Martin Luther King, some years ago we had a contributor to What Really Happened named Ted Wilburn, who's sadly no longer with us. But he went on out to the Lorraine Motel before it got completely changed around for this memorial museum. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And he took some wide-angle photos of where Dr. King was killed. Now, we've all seen the iconic photo of Dr. King lying on the balcony, and everybody standing above him, and they're all pointing in exactly the same direction. And that photo is always captioned, they're pointing at the rooming house where James Earl Ray supposedly was with his rifle. Well, in the wide-angle views, you can see that that is absolutely not true. They're pointing to the roof of the building next door. And there's a lot of reasons to suspect that the official story about Martin Luther King, like the official story about John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and 9/11 and all the rest of it, was another fiction. And interestingly enough, though, when they took over the Lorraine Motel to make this sort of little commemoration, they changed things around to sell the official story. In the original rooming house where James Earl Ray was, there was a wall right next to that window that made it physically impossible to get into a position to fire the shot from that window. That wall's been completely taken out. And there's now this sort of windbreak divider that's at the end of it that prevents you from seeing where the shot might have actually come from. Interestingly enough, James Earl Ray's rifle, the one planted on him, had a manufacturing defect that left a deep gouge in every bullet that was fired from it. But the bullets that killed Dr. King did not have that gouge. James Earl Ray spent his entire life in prison trying to get a second ballistics test, and the FBI kept stalling and stalling, and they said, well, that earlier ballistic test, they didn't clean the gun properly, and there's this and that, until finally James Earl Ray died of an illness that he could have been cured of had he been out of prison. And at that point, the judge says, nobody has standing, the FBI doesn't need to retest. History is now cemented in this legend. What's really interesting, though, is Martin Luther King's own family filed a civil litigation against the U.S. government in 1999. And they had 4 weeks of testimony, 70 witnesses, and the 12 jurors took just 1 hour to come to the conclusion Dr. Martin Luther King was killed by a government conspiracy. And James Earl Ray was the patsy. He was framed. And his government-appointed lawyer coerced him into pleading guilty, saying they'll let you out early under, mental illness or whatever. And so Ray pleads guilty, and the judge says life in prison, no chance of parole. James Earl Ray tried to recant the plea, and the judge said, no, can't change your mind now. Every court, you're allowed to change your plea, except this one case. Now, what's really interesting about this civil trial in 1999, up until that point, the King family was lionized by the corporate media, the survivors of this great man, and the instant they filed this lawsuit, they're a bunch of hoaxers, they're a bunch of phonies, they're out to make a fast buck, you don't want to listen to these people, just turned on them with a vengeance. But the reality is there's a lot of wet work gets done by the U.S. government and other parties, and you're just supposed to wink and go along with it. Now, apparently, and this is being reported over at Matrix Bob, George Michael, who died recently, the police are treating that now as a suspicious death. And apparently somebody objected to George Michael's increasing outspoken political, anti-establishment populist views. And yet another one here, Dr. Udo Ulfkott, was a gentleman who'd been in the corporate media for a long, long time, and he did a video interview on Russia Today just a couple of months ago saying he was continually forced to basically put out intelligence agency-generated propaganda under his name. And if he'd refused, he would have lost his job. And that was a huge embarrassment to the intelligence agencies, and now he's no longer with us, dead supposedly of a heart attack at 56. Go back and read that Clinton dead bodies list, and you'll see some of these murders are very, very obvious. But if you're a loyal American, you will believe the propaganda and the cover-up. Apparently, Martin Luther King's niece came on out and said she voted for Donald Trump. And I got to tell you, my hat is off to Nicole Kidman, who's a fine actor, very pleasant to look at, and she's dual citizenship, America and Australian. She came on out and said, look, Trump is the president, deal with it. And, of course, she's being excoriated by all the snowflakes out there in Hollywood, and fortunately she's far enough along in her career where I don't think she has to worry about too much negative impact. But it's time for people to start standing up to those snowflakes out there and say, look, this is not a way for civilized people to behave. Blacklistings and all the rest of that stuff, that's the behavior of children. Now, as you know, at the inauguration this Friday, one of the bands that will be performing is from the Talladega College. This is an historically black university. And the liberals were out there screaming, how could you play for Donald Trump? He's a white man and he's therefore racist. And you're interestingly enough, the fans of Fox News are rallying around this band from Talladega. And I think it's a good thing. And by the way, have you noticed there is this horrible, horrible double standard going on now? If you were to come on out and say something like, if you were to say all blacks are criminals, or if you were to say all Hispanics are lazy, you would be denounced in the media as being racist, and justifiably so. But apparently it's okay for people to come on out and say all white people are racist, and you get applauded, and you get TV interviews, and you get funding, and you get all these donations. for saying all white people are racist. I mean, it's a very obvious double standard, and you don't cure racism by being racist in reverse. But apparently, the editor of Ebony, Jamila Lemieux, in an interview with CNN, said that really white people can't be victims of hate crime. Hate crime is always by white people against blacks. That when you have 4 black kids grab a white kid mentally challenged and torture him for almost 2 days, that's not really a hate crime. There is this very obvious bias going on, and bias is wrong no matter which direction it's going. If it had been 4 white kids attacking a black kid, and CBS Radio tried to imply that it was, then everybody's screaming, oh, racism, hate, 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 hate. But yes, white people are the victim of racism. It's going on right in front of us, and also sexism. Up in Canada, apparently there's a group of social justice warriors who are going around to the various bars, handing out free drink coasters for the bars to put under glasses. And of course, the owners of the bars are grateful. It's one less thing they have to buy. And the coasters are saying things like, gender is fluid, men are all lies. But because it's women who are doing this, it's considered free speech. If men were to say women are all lies, or gender is fixed, or even worse, just complain about the coasters, they could be charged with hate speech under Canadian law. When are you going to wake up and realize that discrimination and prejudice is wrong in every direction? There seems to be this very childish attitude that because we imagine we have been the victims of discrimination and propaganda, most of which is created by politicians seeking to exploit us for votes and money. That's really where all this stuff comes from. And then they get this childish idea, well, it was done to me. I mean, not to me personally, but I've been told by this politician it's been done to my entire race. Therefore, it's time for me to get even and get back. And that's not how it works. Now, Friday is the inauguration. It cannot come quickly enough, and the snowflakes, buttercups, whiners are apparently getting ready to mount some serious disruption. Over at Project Veritas, Kevin O'Keefe has scored with another video where he's caught some of these snowflakes from a group calling itself Disrupt J20, who are planning on dropping a bottle of butyric acid in the ventilation system at the Trump inaugural ball. Now, butyric acid is not actually poisonous, but it is very smelly. It is very stinky. It takes weeks to go away. And they're talking about dumping this in the ventilation system at what they're calling the deplorable. I don't know what these people are thinking. They're certainly not thinking in terms of public support for what they're doing. You don't get popular support for your agenda by going on out and committing actions like this. The Democrats are going to be decades recovering from this last election, and it's only going to get worse if they try these childish tricks on Friday. Meanwhile, Bikers for Trump, which is a motorcycle organization. It's comprised of veterans, motorcycle enthusiasts. They have already been present at many of the Trump rallies to stand between Trump and all of these anti-Trump snowflakes. And apparently, in response to all this talk about disrupting the inauguration, Bikers for Trump are going to be there for the inauguration. And I can just see these snowflakes trying to go up against the bikers. That alone will be worth tuning into the inauguration to watch, to see that happen. And the snowflakes might learn what hurt really does feel like. And it's a lot worse than a bad word, a naughty word. Oh, he said a word that hurt my feelings. All right, let's try a baseball bat. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I seem to have a bad spot on my master fade now. Okay, let's see. We're going to do a quick phone call. Wes in Idaho. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael.
Yes.
Reason for my call, the history of hate crimes. I'm kind of surprised this thing in Chicago, 4 black people beating up a white man. They're charging them with hate crime. I'm surprised to see that. Has it ever really happened before? Again, what is the history of such charging blacks with hate crimes when they injure a white?
It has happened before, and but again, it's a very one-sided thing. The presumption is always that when there's white on black crime, that it's a hate crime. When there's black on white crime, that it's just an ordinary crime. I really don't think there should be a distinction. I think crime is a crime is a crime. We should punish it all appropriately. And not sort of like have this protected, exalted victim class, because that's fodder for the liberals to exploit for elections. I mean, look how shamelessly Hillary was engaging in this race baiting that was going on to try and convince the black population that the whites were going to come in and eat their livers if they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. And it failed miserably, but it's left us with a population of black people who've actually become convinced that the white people are their enemy. We're trying to bring back the slave plantations and a lot of other nonsense. And that's what led to that situation up there in Chicago. And very clearly it qualifies as a hate crime, especially bolstered by some of the YouTube videos some of these perpetrators had made earlier where they talk about shooting white people and so forth. Obviously, there was a racist motive there. And obviously, under the law, that makes it a hate crime.
A second question. The continent of Africa, 1.1 billion people. Do they manufacture any cars, airplanes, computers, buses? If we're all equal, the year's 2017. Is it white racism, perhaps, that is holding back the continent of Africa from manufacturing anything they need, like a tractor to help produce a farm, agriculture, to feed their people?
Well,
Why?
hang on. There's no question that economic imperialism held Africa back. It was seen as a vast pile of natural resources. But Africa is coming along technologically. They got a good film industry down there. Precinct 19 was a great movie, was a success around the world. Ethiopia is now developing its own space launch capability. So I think you may be a victim of a popular image of Africa that is slightly outdated.
I haven't seen a car, an airplane, a computer, a washing machine, a bicycle, a motorcycle, anything. I can't eat a film industry. What's this space technology coming from? Ethiopia? Are they going to be landing on the moon?
Okay, Wes, your prejudice is showing. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Andy in Texas. Andy, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, Mike, nice day today over here where I'm at in Texas. But, hey, don't you think some of these snowflakes would have melted away because of this global warming by now?
Oh, one could only hope, but unfortunately, no.
Well, no, really what I called about is, I'm a veteran from the military and whatnot, and I think I speak for a handful of veterans, and I think another handful will agree with me. But if they harm one hair on the head of Donald Trump, they will pay dearly for that. I think I can say that successfully. I think we've got enough disgruntled people running around here, and a lot of us are armed and ready to go. And when the order comes, and the order might just be your heart saying, "Hey, time to go." But when it happens, it's going to happen, and these people are they're gonna reap it. I mean, this central bank, these Lindsey Grahams, these McCains, I think those guys got bullseyes on them from us veterans and whatnot, them warmongers. I think that this is coming to a head here, but if they harm one little hair on my buddy Trump, and I don't even know the guy, but from what he's done, he's my buddy.
I'll tell you,
I'm
sure there's a very good reason to not consider such action, and as soon as I can think of one, I'll get back to you. We got to take a break to commercial. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to the show. Now, with all of this information coming out, all these whining, liberal, crybaby, spoiled brats who are taking time off from their art history studies that they think is somehow going to repay all those student loans, to go to Washington, D.C. and try and disrupt the inauguration with bottles of butyric acid and who knows what all else. Apparently they found some guns and ammo stashed in the area. Trump prudently is enhancing security for the inauguration and for all the events. Now, there's another aspect to all of this we should keep in mind. This could just be a propaganda campaign to scare people away from showing up for the inauguration. So the corporate media can say, see, America doesn't really love Trump. Hardly anybody showed up for his inauguration. Because if you'll remember, I mean, they were bussing people in for Obama's inauguration. They took huge, gigantic, high-resolution photos. Look at all the people who are celebrating America's first black president. And we know presidents are unfortunately cursed with monumental egos. And I don't think Trump is up to the level of that of a George W. Bush or Barack Obama. But I'm sure that Obama would love for Trump's inauguration to have a smaller audience than his own did. And so most of all of this posturing and talk could just be to scare people away from showing up, which wouldn't affect me. If I were in the area and I were lucky enough to be invited, I'd show up. Anyway, but good he's enhancing security. I don't think there's ever been a more contentious election since Lincoln himself, who was also facing death threats on his way to Washington, D.C. to take office here. All right, let's grab another phone call. George in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I hope your voice gets better soon.
Well, me too, or I'm out of radio.
Well, anyway, a message to the snowflakes that are being paid by George Soros. I'd rather scrub toilets at Trump Tower for minimum wage than be paid by George Soros to disrupt the transition of power.
I would add to that with my tongue. I would rather scrub toilets with my tongue than accept George Soros money to disrupt the Trump administration.
Yeah. But anyway, about Martin Luther King thing. You know the thing I was sitting there reading online and listening to the civil rights leaders in Houston and all that stuff, or sitting there touting about Martin Luther King. You know, it just comes to say all these Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, even Congressman Lewis, they all prove one thing in this day and age. They all outserved their usefulness in the civil rights movement.
Well, they've outlived their usefulness to the black community, because what made Martin Luther King such a danger to the government was he really was bringing white and black people together. He wasn't just playing racism in reverse, which is what we're seeing out of the Al Sharptons and so forth. He was bringing whites and blacks together. He was truly uniting them as a single American people, and they were standing up in opposition to things the government was doing wrong, like the war in Vietnam. And that's why he was a danger. And so Martin Luther King was assassinated, and Jesse Jackson was positioned to basically inherit the civil rights movement from him, and Jesse Jackson obediently transitioned it into maintaining the adversarial atmosphere between blacks and whites and taking the focus off of the opposition to the war in Vietnam.
Well, and you know, as I noticed, the King family, Martin Luther King's survivors in his family, I noticed they don't really they don't really go shoulder to shoulder too much with Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton, because I really think they know the scam. They're trying to use his name, and what they're doing is completely opposite of what Martin Luther King espoused. I don't really think Martin Luther King would stand shoulder to shoulder with Barack Obama. Polar opposites.
Well, I mean, they're close to each other. Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream," and Obama said, "I have a drone," but that may be too great a bridge for them to get past here. But, I mean, there were stories that when Jesse Jackson was running around screaming that, you know, Dr. King was assassinated, we've got to do something, you know, this was an attack by the white men on the black community, and he had a bloodstained shirt that he claimed he got bloody tending to Dr. King, and it later came on out that he'd just taken a shirt, gotten a chicken, and got the chicken blood all over the shirt, and that was the prop that he was using as he went around speaking.
Yeah, but you know, the thing is, it's I won't know one thing. I know Donald Trump is going to be sworn in, and I just have a feeling that these snowflakes are going to really be snowflakes, because I really think when they feel the heat of the opposition against them, that it's real red-blooded Americans, those snowflakes are going to melt in evaporate.
Well,
so
I think it's more PR than actual threat. We know that Soros and various other groups are paying for these troublemakers to go on out and do a rental ruckus, and they probably need the money and so forth. But it's all public relations. If there were a real civil war in this country, it's very obvious the liberals wouldn't stand a chance because, first of all, they're so scared of guns they wouldn't dare touch one. And again, like that other caller said, there are a lot of Americans serving veterans. They're not, and I'm not encouraging this. I don't want to see any of this happen in the streets of America. But unfortunately, at this point, if these liberals keep pushing this, and they really try and bring harm to the elected president of the United States of America, they could trigger a civil war. And if it does happen, I don't want it to happen, but if it does happen, we have to make sure history puts the blame for it where it belongs. The whining snowflake crybaby liberals, Hillary supporters, and Soros.
Oh, yeah, Mike, I forgot to mention this, but I went to Target, Walmart, Dollar General, and this is a different subject, but, we're getting record cold winters, and I'm just telling people, beware when you buy space heaters. Make sure that they have that Underwriter's Lab label on it, because a lot of them going on out there that don't have that Underwriter's label on there. So people, be careful.
Yeah, you do. I saw a commercial for one on TV, and I forget the brand name, but it's this little tiny box that plugs into the wall. And I was looking at it and saying, either it doesn't put out a lot of heat, or it can't heat sink itself, and there's a hazard there. But yes, absolutely, if you're not familiar with what we mean by the Underwriters Laboratory, it is a laboratory, as the name says, that does product testing. They don't work for the corporations. They are actually paid by the insurance companies who want you to buy safe products so that you don't burn your house down and cash in your fire insurance. And that's what that Underwriters Laboratory label means, that this product has been tested to be safe in your home, which will save the insurance corporations a huge amount of money. So it's always a good thing to look for, because they're in this desperate grab for the last few pennies of profits before the collapse. These big box stores, they're selling stuff that is very dangerous. It's very poor quality construction. I've had problems with a lot of stuff lately that, unfortunately, because we can't actually buy it here in Hawaii, I have to order it online, and I'll get it on shipped in, and it's falling apart right out of the box.
Well, good thing I bought a coffee percolator at a garage sale this weekend, and it works great. And it's very old. Anyway, Mike, have a good night. Good night.
Thank you very much, and I'm in agreement with you. I used to have one of those fancy computerized coffee makers so my coffee would be ready in the morning. And there's always this little gold basket, which is the first thing to start wearing out after about 4 months, and you can never buy a replacement for it. So I just quit, and I've gone back to an old-fashioned manual coffee press, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I just had a reader's email coming on in, responding to the phone call from Wes, saying a simple Google search shows there are several car manufacturers in Africa. So there we go. Now, as you know, let's see. Oh, that'll be interesting. I have to look at that next commercial break. That'll be fun. What's going on here right now is a fight over who's really running the United States of America. And what we're seeing is the CIA has just sort of gotten used to being in control. Remember, all of the crime and corruption this nation has suffered tracks back to the mid-1980s and a CIA operation called Screwworm, that was smuggling illegal, untraceable military weapons to Nicaragua to give to the Contras to use against the Sandinistas. And this was a violation of the Boland Amendment, was a violation of the Logan Act, and because it was illegal, they couldn't use taxpayer money. So the CIA funded this operation with cocaine that was smuggled back into the United States along that smuggling pipeline and sold to your children. And the American side of the pipeline was anchored in Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. And the Clinton and the Bushes are neck deep in this, and because of that, the CIA exerts control over them. In fact, I would say it's probably safe to say that with the probable exception of Jimmy Carter, who was also a reactionary president, the CIA's had the goods on virtually every president since John F. Kennedy. And Trump is an outsider. He's not under their control, and we're seeing the CIA trying to find some way to bring him on down. Now, there are 17 federal intelligence agencies. Most of them are kind of small-time players, but you've got the biggies: NSA, FBI, Homeland Security, National Intelligence Agency, Central Intelligence Agency. And there's a turf war going on. Who's really running the country? When J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI, he used to refer to his own office as the seat of the American government. So Trump is having a war of words with CIA Director Brennan and calls him out for being the person who leaked that bogus story about the prostitutes in Moscow to the media. And just an hour later, a report surfaces in the media claiming there's audio of Russian officials giving money and assets to Trump campaign. And the corporate media actually says, this, according to the CIA, this happened. Lou Rockwell is out there saying it's time to abolish the CIA. I'm absolutely in agreement. I would also abolish the NSA because they're certainly useless at catching the ransomware writers. And given how the FBI just looked the other way with Hillary Clinton's crime, I think it's time to abolish them as well. I think we need a new law enforcement agency that understands their job is enforcing the laws equally across the land. Intelligence agencies have always been problematic for countries. Even when the CIA was first being set up, Wild Bill Donovan said this could easily get out of hand. So did Harry Truman. By its very nature, the CIA is secretive. It lies to the American people. It lies to the U.S. government. It carries out operations that are outside control of the civil government, like the one in Nicaragua. That's not supposed to happen. Now, over at the Clinton Foundation, things are not doing very well. For some strange reason, all these donations that were coming in from foreign governments pretty much stopped when Hillary Clinton lost the election. And now the Clinton Foundation has announced they're closing the Clinton Global Initiative. Now, this is the portion of the Clinton Foundation that is being scandalized over the Haitian relief fundraising drive, where they raised billions and billions of dollars, of which pretty much nothing actually got to the people of Haiti. And they're shutting it all down. I'm sure somewhere in Washington, D.C., there's a paper shredding company that's making a lot of money on a rush job. And the Clinton Foundation is letting go 22 of their staffers, who I'm sure are going to be very, very nervous because they know what it means to be a former Clinton staffer and how short life expectancy can be for them. Now, WikiLeaks is already ahead of the game. They're offering a $20,000 reward for information on anyone in the Obama administration, or for that matter, Hillary's State Department, destroying documents. Because those documents are the property of the American people. All of the work product of the White House and the State Department belongs to the American people. They're not allowed to destroy them. They can classify them, and somewhere down the road they can be declassified. They're not allowed to simply destroy them. Now, as you know, Barack Obama is continuing his farewell tour. He did his farewell speech where he talked mostly about himself. And he's running around the corporate media giving his farewell interviews and screaming about the corrosive nature of talk radio and fake news and how it's ruined democracy. And he's out there saying that we've undermined the tradition of journalism and made it impossible for democracy to thrive. Well, that's only accurate if Obama's idea of a democracy is a pseudo-democracy where you think you have freedom and free elections and free choice, but the tradition of journalism is to constantly brainwash you into doing what the government wants you to do. In that context, his statements are accurate. And that's what we need to realize, what has really been exposed by 2016. We haven't had a real democracy for quite a long time. We've certainly not had an honest, objective corporate media. We've been living under an illusion. We're living in a modern matrix where we think our elections actually change things. This last one did. Americans got together and they overwhelmed the election fraud, just like the Brexit vote. And that's why everybody's in such a panic. They had built this beautiful little dictatorship where all the people living inside of it actually believed that they were free, that they weren't slaves to the bankers, slaves to the federal government. Oh, we freely give you all of our money. We freely pay carbon taxes. We freely send our children to be killed and crippled in wars of conquest. And that's why they're so upset. They're totally freaked out about it. And the corporate media, as I said before, is trapped by their business model. All they can do is go on lying. And apparently the latest lie that was exposed began last Friday, where they were talking about the firing of the Washington, D.C. National Guard general. How could Trump do this? Turns out the Washington Compost was being their usual selves. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the Washington Compost. We're talking about fake news, and we're talking about last week's story where the commanding general of the Washington, D.C. National Guard, who serves directly for the president, was supposedly fired right at the moment where Donald Trump is being sworn into office. And it came on out, and everybody said, what the heck is going on? And then the Washington Post, well, Donald Trump did this. Now, that's not exactly what happened. It is traditional for all people serving in an administration to turn in a letter of resignation to the new incoming president. And usually the resignations will be accepted, some won't. Sometimes the new president coming on is saying, you're doing a good job, we're going to keep you on. Apparently what happened in the case of this National Guard commanding general, the Trump administration asked him to stay on at least through the end of the inauguration and any possible security situations. And the commanding general said, no, I am leaving exactly at this point. Then he runs out to the media to say, Trump has fired me in the middle of the inauguration. So, again, the entire establishment is united against Donald Trump and the American people on this thing. Another case of classic media spin is that Donald Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer, had announced that the press corps might be moved out of the White House press room. And immediately the media said, he's ending access to the press, he's doing this, he's, silencing and everything. And Trump's press secretary has tried to clarify this and said, no, we're going to a larger venue. We're going to have a new press room that's over in this office building. We haven't picked it out, but it's going to be a much larger press venue because we're inviting more people in. And that is why the White House press corps is furious, because they've gotten used to this idea. In this little tiny room, there's only a few seats, and they are all reserved for the giant corporate TV news propagandists. And now, all of a sudden, the White House press corps is going to include bloggers, independent media. That's why they need more seats. And the White House press corps doesn't want to lose that monopoly. How dare you bring these people in here? Well, I mean, look at how the corporate media shilled for Hillary Clinton and attacked Trump nonstop last year. What do you think was going to happen? That Trump was going to come on in and say, well, that's just politics, let's go back to business as usual. He's not that kind of guy. If I were in Trump's position, I'd just kick out the corporate media and I'd have nothing but bloggers and independent media in my press corps. So Trump is at least making a compromise. At least these guys aren't being told you're fired. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about the corporate media versus the independent media. The battle is definitely on. And as yet another example of how the corporate media cannot change their spots. You're probably familiar with a young lady named Abby Martin, who has had online presence and worked briefly as a reporter for Russia Today, and then she left to pursue other activities. And apparently, she was rather surprised when both the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes reported she had quit her job at Russia Today because of her concern about all the propaganda coming out from the Russian government. And Abby is out there saying, no, it had nothing to do with that. But the corporate media is okay with fake news as long as it's anti-Russian. And they're trying to play this game. And Obama and Michael Moore and the rest of them are out there. They're out there taking the position that we know the corporate media is the truth. And we have to go on the attack against the independent media. Put the burden of proof on them. We don't need to deal with burden of proof. The corporate media is destroying itself. With each new exposed lie, the corporate media is falling apart. Ben Garrison has a wonderful cartoon out. It shows this skeleton of a dinosaur labeled corporate media, and it's screaming, believe me, believe me, believe me, and there's a guy in the corner with a laptop who's ignoring him. And bits of the skeleton are falling off. Jurassic Park couldn't even bring this dinosaur back. That's just the ugly, ugly reality. Now, apparently, corporate media ran a story about an alleged attack on a Russian diplomat in Yemen. And Russia's diplomatic mission is saying, it's a fiction. There's been no attack. And nothing has happened. There's been no attack. He's not injured. They're just making this stuff up as they go along. Now, over at BuzzFeed, which is being held up as the icon of the fake news websites, as you know, they ran with this 35-page document about Donald Trump and the hookers and the bed and all the rest of that. And it was very obvious. This was not investigative reporting. It was a total smear job. This is BuzzFeed working to make Trump's transition as hard as possible. And legal experts are now agreeing BuzzFeed could be in some serious legal trouble. And here's where it gets delicious, okay? NBC owns a significant chunk of BuzzFeed. So does Comcast. BuzzFeed is a corporate media outlet. That's why they're behaving this way. And if lawyers for Trump or anybody else smeared in any of these stories files a civil lawsuit for defamation, they're not going to stop at BuzzFeed. They'll go all the way up the food chain to where the money is. So, interestingly enough, Donna Brazile recently made a speech to Democrats. Supposed to be closed door, but it leaked out anyway. And in this speech, came on out and said, no, there wasn't Russia hacking. Hillary lost the election because we messed up. And we know the mistakes they made. They relied too much on their computer models. They weren't paying attention to the swing states. They weren't paying attention to flyover country. A lot of the election fraud was discovered and thwarted before it could have any effect. Yeah, they ran a bad campaign. And they didn't want to admit it. Oh, it's all the Russians' fault. And Donna Brazil, to her credit, is saying it's time to face facts. Anyway, getting over to the war zones. Apparently, the Syrian army has delivered a devastating blow to militants in Wadi Barada and liberated the village of Ain Qadra. They've also gained control over the Ras al-Sira hill overlooking Ain al-Fijah and Deir Magrin. And apparently, the Syrian army, NDF, and Hezbollah are continuing the military operation in the area until the total defeat of militant groups operating there. It's a mop-up operation is what they're talking about. Earlier in the day, 3 more settlements in Syria joined the ceasefire plan, and then another 3 hopped on board for a total of 6. This thing is all but over. This is the greatest setback to the U.S. government since Vietnam. We're going to take a second to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, out here in Hawaii, we have a Congresswoman, Tulsi Gabbard, and she's a Democrat, but she is right on topic. And I really wish that Trump had considered her for a position in his administration, even though she's of the opposing party. But Tulsi Gabbard is basically abandoning the orthodox media, the corporate media, the orthodox view, and basically saying it's time to understand, yes, the United States government, the Obama administration, the State Department under Hillary Clinton, funding and arming terror groups Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And she's introducing a bill to stop it. Because if you or I were to give money, weapons, or support to Al-Qaeda or ISIS, we'd be going to jail. So why is it okay for the President and the Secretary of State to do it? I'm trying to get her on the show. I think she's absolutely amazing here. Now then, we're hearing about this Operation Atlantic Resolve, which is the umbrella name that's been put over all of this saber-rattling all over Poland, Europe, Syria, all of this stuff. And a lot of people say, what is this really all about? Is it really about protecting the Atlantic from Russia? Russia doesn't seem to be doing anything in the Atlantic. Is it about opposing Russia and Syria? Well, yeah, but you don't need to involve NATO for that. So we're looking at this article coming out of RINF.com and saying basically Atlantic Resolve is a continuation of an agenda that's been going back to the 1990s of encirclement of Russia, to isolate it from the rest of the world, to block all trade and resources, to basically lay siege to this entire nation. I don't think it can work, but that seems to be what they're doing. We know that the U.S. has been building bases all across the Middle East as they conquer these nations to basically make stink face at Russia, and now they're fortifying Europe. Now, Donald Trump is out there, he's making an offer saying that he's going to lift the Russia sanctions in exchange for a nuclear reduction deal, which sounds like a good idea to me. Unfortunately, and this is still the first part of negotiations, of course, Russia's saying, no, the two are not linked. The sanctions were illegal and unjustified. We're willing to talk nuclear reduction, but that has to be a separate discussion, which I don't think is unreasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable at all here. Now, Lithuania has announced they're going to build a 45-mile-long wall against Russian aggression. Russia came back on and said, we'll give you the BRICS. That's a good way to deal with that nonsense here. Lithuania, we want a wall against you. Okay, here's the BRICS. Build away. Apparently, the U.S. is deploying Marines to Norway just to annoy Russia. Boy, wait till they experience some of that salty licorice. They'll be headed back home. Meanwhile, on a more serious note, Ukraine's building up their forces on the Donetsk border. It looks like they're trying to very quietly have a new mobilization without anybody noticing. Too late. Russia's deputy foreign minister has met with the Fatah delegation from Palestine. As you know, yesterday they had this big multi-nation conference on recognizing a Palestinian state. Israel did not show up, of course, saying it's completely futile. And oddly enough, neither did Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, which has long been suspected of being a little too cozy with Israel. And now Russia is talking with Fatah. So we might see some dramatic changes there. All righty, moving on here. Venezuela, as if they don't have enough troubles already, is starting to hold military exercises. They are claiming they have intelligence that the U.S. might try either an overt or covert invasion. And it's not entirely unrealistic because Venezuela has been a target for U.S. overthrow, regime change, colonization, whatever, going all the way back to when Venezuela wanted to sell their oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. Remember, that's at the heart of all of this aggression around the world, forcing the world to remain dependent on the U.S. dollar. And the world does not want to be dependent on the U.S. dollar. One reason they may not want to be dependent on the U.S. dollar is nobody seems to know where a lot of it's going. As you know, Ron Paul, when he was in Congress, sponsored a bill to audit the Federal Reserve fully, something the Federal Reserve not only adamantly refuses, but they have issued veiled threats. They'll crash the economy if anybody tries to look at their books. Now, there's two factors there. First of all, if the American people ever learned just how much real wealth has been sucked out of their pockets over the last 100 years for the privilege of using the Federal Reserve's ink and paper, they would be stunned and then they would be angry. The other issue is the Federal Reserve's own Inspector General cannot account for some $9 trillion missing from the accounts. And that's over and above the trillions that have been revealed that were poured all over Wall Street to keep the economy looking like it's ticking along. The reality is Wall Street is losing money left and right. And it's just these cash injections that keep it looking like it's still functioning here. The money center banks, despite their soaring stock price, are letting tens of thousands of people go. They appear to have hit a wall. Maybe they're just stalling until Trump is in office, then they're going to let the economy collapse. Blame him for it, the way they did Herbert Hoover. Now, over at a hedge fund, Horseman Global, which has a reputation for being about as bearish as you can get, they actually lost quite a bit of money, and they've just announced they're starting to close parts of their shorts book. In other words, they're pulling out of their hedge positions. That's a red warning sign telling us that they're expecting downturns in all those areas that they don't have the funds to cover on. Down in Mexico, because of the drop in the peso and the high inflation, Mexico is going to start cutting its dependence on U.S. food producers. This despite the North American Free Trade Agreement. And it's actually probably not a bad idea because, as you know, some years ago, the U.S. Department of Agriculture developed a genetically modified corn called epicite. And it was designed to render any human beings who eat this corn infertile. It tricks your body into making antibodies that attack human sperm. Now, if that gene has escaped into the wild, as so many others have, we're looking at a serious problem. Here in the United States of America, there's been a significant population drop, coincident with the experimentation, the open field experimentation of the epicite gene, and that population decline has hit hardest the Hispanic segment of the population, who are the highest per capita consumers of corn. As it turns out, there's been a similar decline in birth rates down in Mexico. So maybe Mexico is better off not importing corn from the United States of America. Now, apparently, following Donald Trump criticizing Germany and threatening a tariff of 35% on BMWs, it was saying, how can we get more German people to build American cars? And apparently, Germany's deputy chancellor came on out and said, you guys could build better cars. That would make it a little bit easier. And I hate to side with Germany on this against Donald Trump, but he's absolutely right. America doesn't know how to make good cars anymore. If you're watching Grand Tour, with the former hosts of Top Gear, it's on Amazon Live, and we watch it every week. And everywhere they go around the world, there's a lot of fond nostalgia for America's golden age of automotive manufacturing, but absolutely no respect for anything being built by American auto companies today. How you get trade going is you produce good products other people want to buy. You don't descend into manufacturing junk or growing toxic food and then try and politicize the other people into buying your products. In the long run, that can't possibly work. That was the main reason that both the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership stalled over the issue of forcing people to buy GMO food when their own countries require it to be labeled and in some cases banned. Now here in the United States, we're talking about the decline in our economy and how many people are on food stamps. It turns out a big part of that surge in food stamps is outright fraud, because apparently there's an estimated $2.6 billion worth of food stamps went out through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and apparently stores authorized to accept food stamps were using or recording the Social Security numbers of deceased persons. The dead can not only vote, they can buy pretzels. And now there's this bizarre idea that you can use your food stamp credits for purchases for non-food items like through Amazon. It's just nuts. Absolute nuts. Now, down in South Korea, their government, they've got a major political crisis over there, and the country's special prosecutor is seeking a warrant to arrest the head of Samsung. This is the country's largest conglomerate. They make TVs, radios, computers. We got Samsung products here. I got a flash drive made by them somewhere around here. And apparently, he is accused of paying multi-million-dollar bribes to a friend of President Park Geun-hye, who's just been impeached. Amazing here. Now, over at the European Union, they are threatening to block the Brexit deal unless Britain accepts free movement and pays into the EU budget. In other words, Britain can say it has left the European Union as long as the refugees can still pour in there and the British taxpayers are supporting Brussels. Doesn't sound very good. So the EU is saying, we'll cut you off completely. Donald Trump has responded by saying that when Great Britain leaves the European Union, they will be on the fast track to all the trade deals they want with the United States of America. So they don't have to worry about whether or not they're able to do business with Europe. Peace through commerce. That is a good model for the world. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Kevin in Detroit. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Fine. Well, except for my voice, I'm fine.
Yeah, are you feeling okay?
Mm-hmm. I'm feeling a lot better. It's just my voice is kind of shot.
You sound horrible. Anyway.
Actually, I sound like a radio announcer.
That's Sauce's voice. But anyway, what I'm calling about, I am from Detroit, the Motor City, and, I've heard what you said about, the auto manufacturers. And, quite frankly, Mike, the globalists have forced us to compete with slave labor. And, you cannot compete with slave labor with a union company. The people at the big three are making, $30 an hour. They're living a great life, and now they're here. The globalists have forced us to compete with slave labor in China and Japan, and that is why we are not making the quality products that the country wants.
Well, it's not just the country; it's what the world wants here. And I beg to differ with you on a couple of points. First of all, the pay disparity between management and workers in the United States is a big part of it. It isn't the work is going over to these countries where workers are paid less, although in Japan auto workers are very highly paid relative to their cost of living. It's that the heads of American corporations as a whole want to be earning hundreds of times what ordinary workers are. There's the second issue that in order to maximize profitability, quality corners are being cut at the design stage, not the labor and assembly stage. And I'll give you a couple examples, faulty ignition switches and so forth and so on. There's only so much that you can value engineer something before it ceases to be seen as a respectable product.
Well, Mike, in my opinion, we should not, this country in any way, shape, or form should not have to compete against slave labor. That is something we should, any country that practices, and I don't know if you know it or not, but over in China, they actually had to put safety nets around some of their buildings to discourage people from jumping out the windows and committing suicide.
I've heard. Hang on, Kevin, just a second. Okay. First of all, we have slave labor here in the United States. It's called the prison industrial complex.
Not.
Okay.
We should not.
All right. The other thing is a lot of people who are saying we're competing against cheap labor is they're looking at foreign workers.
Slave labor.
Hang on, Kevin. Give me a second to make my point. They're looking at the relative value of their paychecks denominated in U.S. dollars without allowing for the fact that the cost of living in those other countries is also considerably lower taxation and so forth. So it's a much more complex issue. And again, I watch a lot of automotive shows. I've seen not just Top Gear and Grand Tour, but a lot of shows about auto factories in other countries. I don't see anybody there who looks like a slave. There's a lot of robotics, and that is maybe something we ought to be looking at as well. But as far as I can tell, the decline of America's automotive industry is entirely the result of a management class which, starting at the end of World War II, stopped having any respect for the products that they were making and focused entirely on maximization of profit. And that is the result of the Harvard Business School and that post-war climate, that industrial boom, which led to the creation of managers who were trained so rapidly and did not rise up through the ranks of manufacturing that they didn't really intuitively understand what they were doing. And those middle managers of the post-war years are the corporate leaders of today, who just figure if they get it at the lowest possible price and resell it at the highest possible profit. Kevin, got to let you go and take a call for a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And my comment about the cars has triggered bunches of emails, discussions over in the chat room and everything. And I know what America can do when it's allowed to do it. But we're overmanaged, not just by corporate management, but by the government itself. You can manage a company into paralysis. You can manage a nation into paralysis. Now, to clarify on what I mentioned before to that caller from Detroit, at the end of World War II, the United States was pretty much the only industrial nation on Earth whose industrial base had not been bombed into rubble. As the world rebuilt from World War II, they had to come to the United States to get the tools to do it with. Ball bearings, machine tools, all of that stuff. And that was a big part of the prosperity of the 1950s. The whole world came to us. And it created a crisis because new businesses were starting or expanding, and they didn't have managers. And they didn't dare take the people off the manufacturing floor to promote them because they needed them where they were, because these were the people who knew how to make the ball bearings, the machine tools, and so forth. So Harvard Business School created a program of scientific business management, which was a standard set of business management tools, PERT chart, Gantt chart, that kind of thing. And they told businesses, if you will basically follow this standard, then you can acquire managers from outside your factory who will be able to run your factory just fine. That was the first big lie. And then Harvard created a degree program to go with it, the Masters in Business Administration. Managers who were taught to interact with this standardized business management interface and then could hop from company to company to company to company. So an MBA could be working at a company doing pharmaceuticals this week, and then 2 weeks down the road could be working at a car factory, and 2 weeks beyond that could be working at someplace baking donuts, and it wouldn't make any difference to them. And that is exactly where the decline in American manufacturing really began. Because when you grow up with a business, with a factory, you know it, you know the product, you know all the little intricacies of it. These MBAs didn't have that. And worse, they had this arrogant attitude that, well, I'm the MBA, I'm on this side of all this scientific management, I don't need to really look past the charts to run the factory. And so we got this disconnect between the management of manufacturing, and for that matter agriculture, and the actual process of making the products work. And it also created a certain degree of hostility among the workers who felt this glass ceiling closing over them, where they couldn't be promoted within these factories they'd spent their entire lives in. And over time, those mid-level managers became the corporate leadership. And they're still emotionally disconnected from the process of manufacturing products or growing healthy agricultural food. It's just all about making sure the charts and stock performance is up, and that's it. Our business mindset, if you will, has become fragmented. It's become schizophrenic. And that's why you will have money junkies at the top of pharmaceutical corporations who view the harm their vaccines are causing as an issue of profit and loss. And as long as we're making more money selling vaccines, then we're losing money on vaccine lawsuits, although the pharmaceutical companies don't pay those costs. Let's pick another drug. You know, some drug they put on out, and as long as they're making more money selling that drug than they're losing in the lawsuits from people harmed by the drug, they're happy. And they shouldn't be, but that's exactly where we are. Our business mindset as a nation is schizophrenic at this point. Now, speaking, hang on a second. Somebody was sending a comment. If you send me a comment, include the context, because if it's a one-word response to something I've said 10 minutes ago, I probably don't have any idea what you're talking about here. Now, over in Germany, Angela Merkel is really getting on out there. She is still trying to hang on to this idea that democracy is, I tell you what to do and what to think, and you do it. And she is starting to understand there's a growing anti-establishment mood spreading throughout the entire world, and she's trying to stand firm against it. And she made a very odd comment in a speech that was basically an attack on populism, saying, be grateful you have free speech, which sounds to me like a veiled threat to end free speech because of this gosh darn rise of populism of people who think they should have something to say about how their country is run, which is what democracy is supposed to be. But we're finding out more and more of these so-called democratic nations are anything but. They're very carefully crafted illusions of democracy, concealing a heart of fascist economic dictatorship. Germany is now blaming Washington, D.C. for causing the refugee crisis, and to an extent they're correct. Because of all these wars of aggression all over these countries in the Middle East and now in Africa, that's what made these people refugees. And Soros and his Open Society Foundation spent money to lure them into Europe and in the United States to blur us all together. And we don't want to be blurred. We don't want to lose our identity. We don't want to have our identity stolen from us, which is what's really going on. Now, getting on back to more domestic issues, there's a new lawsuit being filed against the Dakota Access Pipeline Project. And apparently this is not coming from the Native American protesters, but the landowners along a stretch of about 9 miles of the pipeline's route. And apparently Dakota Access LLC is being accused of fraud, harassment, and threatening the landowners to get these parcels of land to lay the pipeline across. And especially on the issue of fraud that is actionable. And so now there's a civil lawsuit going on. Now, actor Mark Ruffalo has just been added to the terror watch list. You may wonder why. Well, apparently it's because he is out there in support of a documentary called Gasland. It's been out for a while, and it talks about the dangers of fracking and how it contaminates groundwater and drinking water. And I've seen the documentary. It's out there. And Mark Ruffalo's out there saying, you got to look at this. There's a problem. And because of this, he's now on the terror watch list. Apparently, if you get out there and you say fracking might be dangerous, or vaccines might be causing autism, or GMO might be harmful to your health, you get put on the terror watch list. I guess I must be there. We're going to take a phone call. Steve in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Great show. Wow. I just got to pull over off to the side of the road real quick. Hey, I was just listening to your show and thinking about some words that just keep coming up. Poor little snowflake. And, man, doesn't that sound like the title for a good children's story? You know, you could have poor little snowflake the duck, and Hillary Clinton could be an evil goose. And I just thought it would be a great fairy tale. And I really am not good at drawing.
I think if we were going to go that way, I would cast Hillary as the Ice Queen from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You know.
Okay, man.
That would be
well.
I
don't know. As I was thinking about that, I looked at the Obama family, and you look at Obama has a wife allegedly and 2 daughters. It's a very small family. I just saw a picture of Donald Trump's family. He has more like an extended family. He has a pretty large family. So it's interesting to what that says about him and his family values too.
Well, I mean, you know, Trump has been married 3 times, and that's part of the stresses of modern society. I've been married twice. I'm on my 2nd wife, and I'm sticking with this one. And, you know, Trump has had children with all of his spouses. Obama, being liberal, may have been going along with this idea that, you know, to not harm planet Earth, we should not have any more than 2 children as our replacement population. So I wouldn't read too much into it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Okay, well, love the show. Take care of the snowflakes for me, man.
No, you got the wrong show on that one. You know, this is one time when I wish we did have global warming and those snowflakes had just melted away. Thanks a lot for the phone call, Steve. And, again, getting into the issue of population control and everything, I was born at a time when large families were seen as a good thing. And my grandparents, of course, were of a generation where lots of kids meant redundancy because childhood death was a lot more common back then. Unfortunately, now childhood autism is taking its place. It's really out of control over there. I was also born into a time when TVs were black and white, very low resolution. National Geographic was still published in black and white, didn't have color pictures back then. And if you wanted to see exotic animals and amazing feats of athletic skill, you'd go to the circus. And I remember on more than a couple of occasions going to the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And now it is closing after 146 years. And it is the end of an era, but I can understand why. Now, first of all, over at PETA, they've been after circuses for a long time, saying it's cruel and horrible treatment of the animals. And there's an argument made there, but the counter-argument is that in a lot of cases, these animals wouldn't even be alive if they weren't being cared for by a circus. Because certainly in later years, many of them were bred in captivity. And if you've got an elephant who's alive performing in a circus, that's one less elephant that is going to be gunned down by the ivory hunters. So it's kind of a great argument. But in this day of global, instantaneous, high-def television, you don't need to go to a circus to see these things. Whether it's death-defying acts, you can see them in the first person with the GoPro cameras. And right now, BBC is cranking out some absolutely amazing programming for their Planet Earth 2. So I understand why circuses are now obsolete, and I'm sorry to see the Ringling Brothers Circus go, but I understand why it's happening. Anyway. Speaking of snowflakes, and this is where it gets ridiculous here. Over at Frederick County Public Schools, they have fired a lady, Katie Nash, who caused a ruckus. She was running the school district's Twitter feed, and apparently on January 5th, a student tweeted to the Twitter account asking schools to close tomorrow, spelled T-A-M-M-A-R-O-W. And Katie wrote back on the school Twitter feed, how would you learn to spell tomorrow, spelled T-O-M-O-R-R-O-W. And she was fired for that because it hurt the poor spelling students' feelings. When I was a kid and going to school, if you made a spelling mistake or a math mistake or a history mistake, yeah, they made fun of you. The other students and the teacher would make fun of you. That was part of the process of encouraging you to actually learn what you're doing. But now apparently it's okay to tolerate bad spelling, bad grammar, bad punctuation, because to correct them, it'll hurt their poor little feeling. It's too bad. I don't know what's going on in education between Common Core and political correctness. And remember that Texas middle school teacher? And she was having sex almost on a daily basis with a 13-year-old student, and she got pregnant from him. And she's been sentenced to 10 years in prison. And I posted that as a reminder that child sexual predators are not confined to only men, or the clergy, or rich politicians. In fact, I'm going to share a little story from my past with you. I worked on a movie called Brain Scan. I was the on-set visual effects supervisor. In fact, it was actually the first time I got to be an on-set visual effects supervisor. And it starred the kid from Terminator 2, Eddie Furlong. And Eddie Furlong was absent from the set a lot. Now, because he was still a kid, the studio had to provide a tutor to make sure he was still getting his education. And it turned out that this teacher provided and Eddie Furlong, they were studying sex education, I guess it would be. And it was kind of a stink, but nothing was ever done, because back then it was considered wrong if it was a male teacher having sex with a female student, but it was sort of like looked on as okay if it was a female teacher having sex with a male student. And certainly if I'd been in that situation when I was a student, I probably wouldn't have complained either. But it did result in my inadvertently playing a stunt hand in the movie when they couldn't find Eddie. So that was kind of an interesting situation there. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I got an email from somebody responding to that phone call about workers committing suicide at this company in China. It turns out the company that generated that story by putting up safety nets is actually located in Taiwan, not in China. And their actual suicide rate isn't out of line with suicide of workers in other countries such as Japan or during an economic downturn, Wall Street. Okay, it's a little bit overblown, and remember, we live in a world of spin doctoring and deception to try and make us think that we're okay, that we're still the greatest nation on earth, and all these other countries are terrible, and that is simply not true. Now, there's a very alarming story that's coming on out here. Apparently, about a week ago, Washington, D.C. police found 2 caches of weapons near the boathouse at Fletcher's Cove on the Potomac River. This is about 6 miles from where Trump is going to be inaugurated. And I find myself in agreement with that veteran who called on in. If the snowflakes keep on pushing like this, they're going to trigger a civil war. I don't want to see one, but it's a real possibility. And if one happens, I certainly know whose side I'm going to be on. Not that I'd be of much use at my age. So, it's amazing. This is the most contentious election since Lincoln. Now, we're finally getting word about some of the results coming out of yesterday's conference for Israel and Palestine. 70-nation-strong meeting. Israel refused to show up. The Palestinian Authority, for some reason, refused to show up. And apparently Britain is refusing to sign this Paris Declaration for a 2-state solution. So apparently Israel is calling in the chips from every politician they've got blackmail information on. Say, we don't want this to happen. Our idea of peace in the Middle East is we own the whole piece. Somebody pointed out to me kind of a giggle in the original Raiders of the Lost Ark. During the segment, the animation where they're showing the Pan Am flying boat flying across the Middle East, and you can see on the little map in the background Palestine. And how did this ever get past Steven Spielberg? Well, what was he going to put there? The movie is set in the 1930s. Israel didn't exist then. But Palestine certainly did. All right, so let's talk about human-caused global warming. And basically we're seeing stories all over the place about how we're in the middle of the worst ice storm in 10 years. And there are traffic problems all over. If you're living in these areas, make sure you got snow tires on. Make sure you got your chains with you. Because this is the most dangerous kind of weather. I mean, snow is no big deal. Freezing rain and glare ice, that is where the bad stuff happens. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more about human-caused global warming after this. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about human-caused global warming, which obviously should be a dead concept by now. But we're still seeing in the corporate media all these stories about, don't pay no attention to the snow and ice. Really, this is just weather. The climate is broiling. You're to blame. You must pay a carbon tax or the world will end and it will all be your fault. So all across the Midwest, they're dealing with this ice storm that is just putting glare ice on all the highways and all kinds of problems here. Over in Seattle, Washington, Green Lake is frozen for the first time since 1972. And over in the Czech Republic, you probably saw the video on TV. There was a game going on in the gym of this school, and all of a sudden the roof collapses from all the snow that's on top. And everybody's running, and fortunately nobody got hurt. Apparently the referee realized something was going on, and they got out of there. The hard, cold reality is simply this. It has now been 20 years without any statistically significant global warming. In fact, the indications are we're seeing cooling. And the indications are we're seeing a lot of data tampering, computer code rigging, outright lies, and fraud. Now, I want to remind you all of a quote from Professor Chris Foland, who worked at the Hadley Center for Climate Prediction and Research over at the University of East Anglia. This was from just before the ClimateGate scandal broke. And he came on out and he said, the data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data. We're basing them on the climate models. In other words, we don't need to go on out and see what's actually happening in the world. We've got this computer model that tells us the world is broiling. Well, maybe he should have gone out and checked the thermometers a little bit more. Certainly that's what led to the embarrassment with the NOAA 16 satellite, which was discovered to be reporting temperatures 10 degrees hotter than actually on the ground. But apparently Lord Monkton has come on out with his experts and identified that there is a flaw, he's being very gentle here, in every one of these computer models of the climate that results in completely erroneous output. The computer models are wrong. It can be proven mathematically. It's not happening. Now, it looks like we're going into a new little ice age. And that might have some negative effects because what happened during the last little ice age? Europe froze. And people went to church and they told the priest, please, pray to God. Get rid of this awful cold. I need to grow crops. We're starving out here from all the ice. And the priests prayed to the imaginary playmate in the sky, and it kept getting colder. And so what do? Oh, there's this group of people out there who are getting in the way of our communications with the Lord God, and they're called witches. Because if you draw a graph of the temperature of Europe during the Little Ice Age, and you draw a graph of the numbers of which persecutions, tortures, and executions, they are a mirror image of each other. The colder it got, the more fanatical the witch hunters were. we could see that happen all over again. Let's take some phone calls here. Peter in Dallas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'd like to talk about international trade a little bit. When I hear you discuss it, I think there's sort of a variable or a concept that I don't hear included.
What's that?
And so it's Ricardo's theory of relative value. And it makes simple sense, and I think we really need to know, if we figure out why international trade should work, we can see why it isn't working. And it's pretty simple. If somebody in Mexico wants to buy cheap American rice, if we make a simplified version, he's going to find something that's relatively expensive in Mexico, take it to America, sell it for $1, take the dollars, buy the rice, which is cheap in America, bring the rice back to Mexico, sell it for a lot of pesos. So you have to find a relative value difference. So, you really can't buy anything unless you want to sell it. What's not working in our world is we're sending all these dollars overseas, but they never come back. And the reason why they don't come back is because they have more value outside the United States than inside the United States.
No. That's not the reason. The reason they're not coming back is we're not an exporting nation anymore. We're surviving on imports. And it's something like $1.5 billion a day trade imbalance. And part of the problem is that we're not dealing in terms of the relative value of goods. What the money masters tried to do, the globalists tried to carve the world up and assign automaking to this part of the globe and electronics to this part of the globe and agriculture to this part of the globe in order to make every nation dependent on every other nation. Then they could sit astride all the shipping and transit lines and charge huge uplifts for the importation of cheap products. The way trade used to work was that nations produced most of what they needed for themselves, and they traded with other nations for those few things that they couldn't, or for things that had a certain exotic appeal, like spices and whatnot.
Well, and my thinking is we send all these dollars overseas, and they don't come back because they have more value outside the country. And what that means is they're used for two things. One, the petrodollar, they use it to buy petroleum, and two, they use them to put in their banks as reserve currency to value their country. So as long as they have more value outside the country because they're buying petroleum with them or they're backing up their currencies, then we're going to have this problem that we send dollars over, but they never buy anything back from us. And, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, you're partly right.
Nobody wants to take pictures of George Washington for no good reason.
You're absolutely right. The fact of the matter is that if anybody who takes a dollar in international global trade brings it back to the United States of America, there really isn't much of anything for them to buy. Our manufacturing.
That's right.
Yeah, and then, so we're basically discussing the trade imbalance from two different perspectives, but I think we're saying the same thing just in different words.
Well, I think the rest of the world is impoverishing the United States by setting up this kind of this deal where we're buying oil. If we couldn't buy oil, or if outsiders or foreigners couldn't buy oil with those dollars, I don't think we may have found ourselves in this extreme position. Or if it wasn't a reserve currency, I don't think we would have found ourselves in this extreme position. It's the means by which they have shut us down.
Well, basically what it was is Wall Street walked away from this idea of becoming rich by manufacturing products for sale, and instead just looked at ways to try and game the system to bring wealth to themselves without putting anything out there for it. That system is definitely breaking down. And this idea of the world being dependent on the U.S. dollar was how the post-World War II U.S. government tried to exert control over what it saw as a growing global empire. And that's why we're now looking at war with Russia and China, because the ruble and the yuan are threats to that dollar hegemonic domination.
Yeah, and then one day we'll find suddenly that nobody wants the dollar anymore, and we'll all be much poorer people.
Yeah, that is definitely what's going to happen during the crash, and at that point, we're going to have to reset the economic system. We're going to have to write off all this debt, maybe come up with a new currency based on a commodity. And this is why I think the electro is an idea that ought to be looked at, because we don't have enough gold to base a currency on. It's all been shipped off overseas. We don't have enough silver, and we need a commodity with a no recognized value that can grow with the population and be large enough and plentiful enough to not be manipulated.
Have you ever thought about getting Ellen Brown on your program? She has some pretty interesting things about the nature of money. Have you ever discussed about the Bank of North Dakota?
Yeah, we've talked.
The only state that.
Yeah, we've talked about the Bank of North Dakota. We've talked about the fun and games with the Canadian Central Bank. I've posted a lot of Ellen Brown's stuff, and I think I sent her an email about being on my show, but I don't think I ever got a reply.
Okay. Well, I sure appreciate listening to you, sir.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go and do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network, and then we're going to go back to the phones and talk to Nick in Paris, California, I guess. What is Aloha? What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. It's Perris. It isn't like Paris, France, but I'm here in SoCal.
All right.
I was calling because I took your advice, and I brought up the climate swindle to somebody online, a friend of a friend, and I just kind of slowly gave them a little bit of information. I didn't overwhelm them. Trigger their cognitive dissonance, which is what I seem to be encountering in most of these discussions. One thing I wanted to ask you was, I've heard you report in the last few weeks that NASA came out, and if I remember this correctly, they said that CO2 is not a greenhouse gas, and it actually cools the planet. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, you did. This came out about a year ago and was not obviously given a huge amount of coverage by the corporate media. I'll try and dig that out and repost it to WhatReallyHappened.com. But basically, this idea that greenhouse gases are dangerous is modeled on a real greenhouse, where sunlight coming through the glass pane will warm the interior, and then the glass traps the heat from going back out. What NASA discovered is that carbon dioxide will actually trap the infrared component of the sun's light and re-radiate it back out into space. And that's why they said it's actually acting as a mild atmospheric coolant. Now, carbon dioxide was never a real villain greenhouse gas anyway. There are far more plentiful, potent gases in the atmosphere that do act as a greenhouse. Water vapor, obviously the most plentiful of that, but you're not going to convince people to pay a cloud tax. Methane is tremendously potent greenhouse gas, but most methane is produced by deep core microbes, termites, bovine flatulence, and these are all life forms far too intelligent to listen to Al Gore and his nonsense. They specifically settled on carbon dioxide to demonize because they could blame a minuscule portion of atmospheric carbon dioxide on human activity, sound the alarm, and charge us a carbon tax. But the reality is there's a lot of carbon dioxide produced in nature, far more than human activity does. And the carbon Nazis keep trying to say, well, the natural produced carbon dioxide has a natural balance and a natural sink. That's an absolute complete fabrication. There is no balance. We've got a volcano 2 islands over that way. It's pouring out more CO2 every day than all of the cars in the United States in an entire year. And oddly enough, the atmospheric observatory that is used to track atmospheric carbon dioxide sits on the top of those volcanoes. And that strikes me as kind of really bizarre. The fact of the matter is, as atmospheric carbon dioxide goes up, plants will grow faster, taller, produce more food, and suck that carbon dioxide out of the air. It is a natural balancing system, including the carbon dioxide produced by human activity.
I also had another question for you that came to mind with that last caller. I actually studied economics as a major and as my hobby.
Okay.
A value-based currency, sometimes we talk about using gold and silver. It came to mind that perhaps there might not be enough gold and silver out there to use.
Agreed.
As a currency. I'm sorry, am I correct in that assumption?
No, I agreed with you.
Okay, my phone cut out for a second.
Okay.
So what would we use? I mean, if it...
Any commodity that people recognize universally as having value can be the basis of a currency. When the Nazis kicked out their private central bank and issued their new currency, triggering the German miracle, it was based on a unit of labor. You could base a currency on petroleum in kind of a roundabout way. That's what the petrodollar is already doing. I think you could use a unit of electricity as a commodity base for a currency. I would certainly encourage efficient power transmission and storage. And as the population grows, the supply of electricity grows with it, so you never get into shortages and you never get into manipulations.
Mike, that is a brilliant idea. And, of course, that would cause a lot of people to start to generate their own electricity, too. And,
absolutely.
That's a heck of an idea.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video I sent you that was making fun of all the actors trying to,
I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mike. Thank you for your show. I listen to you every day, and your show makes me feel sane. Since I was young, I always knew there was something kind of off about things, and your show helps out. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. We're going to let you go here. Okay. Now, apparently Rosie O'Donnell has drawn criticism for her openly speculating that Donald Trump's son, Barron, who's 10 years old, might be autistic. Now, I'm no fan of Rosie O'Donnell. Okay, let's preface it with that. Rosie O'Donnell came on out and said the reason she said it is her daughter is autistic, and she recognizes the signs. It's a legitimate question. It certainly does not reflect on Donald Trump. Right now, autism is this unacknowledged epidemic through America's children. And what's amazing is that everyone is now acknowledging there is an exploding autistic epidemic. Whether it's Barron, Rosie O'Donnell's son, Robert De Niro's kid, that's why he was supporting Vaxxed. And I think one reason that we might conclude that Barron is suffering some kind of form of autism is that Donald Trump appointed Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a severe critic of vaccine safety, to head a commission on vaccine safety. And, of course, the pharmaceutical industries are in a total meltdown. How could you do this to us? But you need to remember, autism was totally unknown before the 1940s. It's not an historic human affliction. It doesn't go back hundreds or thousands of years, like measles or the Black Plague or anything. In the late 1930s, vaccine makers started adding the mercury-based preservative thimerosal to vaccines as a preservative to control spoilage and maximize profitability. The first cases of autism were noted and described and documented soon after. And today, autism rates are about 1 out of every 45 children. Now, at the present rate of growth, that means by the year 2030, half of all children in the United States will be diagnosed as autistic. That means half of these children will be unavailable to the workforce. And a significant portion of the available workforce will be used up in the care of the autistic population. In other words, unless the cause of autism is dealt with today in a forthright and honest manner, the United States will face a systemic economic collapse of the labor force in 3 decades, assuming our economy has not collapsed from other means since then. Now, I can understand why the money junkies behind the pharmaceutical corporations want to keep their little secret. It's not just a case of dealing with losses today, which in the case of vaccines are covered by the Vaccine Injury Court, which is still using that now discredited CDC report to deny claims by parents whose children are vaccine damaged. But if it turns out that autism is triggered by these vaccine adjuvants, and these vaccine makers knew it all along, they'll be sued out of existence. Now, we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, another very interesting article that we need to share with you on that subject of vaccines. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about vaccines and vaccine safety. And there's a wonderful website. There's a lot of good websites out there about this stuff right now. This one is called traceamounts.com. And they have an article we link to. 10 lies told about mercury in vaccines. I'm going to share a couple of them with you. And one of the lies that we get all the time is that thimerosal, which is 49.5% mercury by weight, is totally safe when used as a preservative in vaccines and other drugs. Now, the facts are, and this is why you should read that little paper insert that comes with the medication. And your health practitioner is probably going to say, shouldn't do that. That little insert, which is on very thin paper and very tiny printing, supposedly to save money. I think it's to discourage people from reading it. It's called the Material Safety Data Sheet. It is required by law to be included with all these medications. The MSDS for Eli Lilly for thimerosal acknowledges exposure to thimerosal in utero during pregnancy and in children can cause mild to severe mental retardation and mild to severe gross motor impairment. They're actually admitting it in the safety sheet. The Sigma Aldrich MSDS lists abortion and fetal death as possible outcomes of exposure to thimerosal by pregnant women. Now, most seasonal and H1N1 flu shots for pregnant women and young children contain 25 micrograms of mercury in the form of thimerosal. For this exposure to be safe, a child would need to weigh more than 550 pounds. In other words, only sumo wrestlers can survive this stuff. Now, another lie that you're constantly getting is mercury is removed from childhood vaccines in, pick a year, any year. Now, officially, the CDC recommended the removal of thimerosal back in 1999. It didn't actually happen. Manufacturers lowered the mercury content in some vaccines. However, in 2002, the CDC began recommending pregnant women and young children get annual thimerosal preserved flu shots. So it became kind of a shell game. Where's the mercury coming from? Here's the kicker. Because of the increase in the number of mandatory vaccines, the total exposure to thimerosal and mercury has gone up. Yes, this vaccine has less thimerosal, but now you're supposed to take 18, 20, however many. 38 now. So the exposure to mercury has actually increased despite that lie. The other lie is thimerosal is well tested. It's been used for 7 years with no problem. That's certainly not true. Apparently back in 1935, the Pittman Moore Company declared thimerosal was unsuitable as a preservative in serum intended to use in dogs. Now that right there is the smoking gun that says the pharmaceutical industry knows this stuff is not good. And that's why they're working so hard to preserve this, to preserve the lies. Because it's one thing to say, we made a mistake this year, we're sorry people died. It's quite another when an entire industry is exposed for knowingly selling toxic, dangerous products for decade after decade after decade and covering it up for the sake of a fast buck. I remember I was in a discussion with somebody about vaccine safety, and they said, well, it's only a few kids. It's only this. It's only this. How about if it's your kid? This is what I meant when I said before about our national business mindset being schizophrenic, where the money junkies are thinking only about the money. And they're simply oblivious to other aspects of what a healthy, functioning economy and industry is about. Quality products that people want to buy, as opposed to being arm-twisted to buy. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Little bit of good news on the GMO front. Now, as you know, a lot of countries around the world ban GMOs. Many more require GMO labeling. And one of the problems with that GMO labeling issue is illustrated by a hoax article that was put out. The article itself was a hoax, but it raises a real issue. And the gist of this article was somebody who was a vegetarian, who was had a tremendous allergy to seafood, was fed a tomato that had been spliced with fish genes, went into anaphylactic shock and died. Now, the story is a fake, but it does raise the possibility. What if you are somebody with a lot of very bad allergies and you are scrupulously avoiding those things you are not supposed to eat, and you bite into something you think it's okay for you to eat, but you don't know what's in there? What could happen? It's a legitimate concern in the era of Frankenfood. Well, as you know, Vermont passed a GMO labeling law. Monsanto immediately went to the federal government and said, you've got to ban GMO labeling. We won't be able to sell our product to anybody if they've got GMO labeling. And, of course, it's a big fight out here in the state of Hawaii because they do a lot of their testing of GMO crops out here on the theory that if something really nasty crawls out of those farm fields, they'd have to swim back across the Pacific Ocean to endanger those real people on the continental United States here. Hawaii, we can let that go. And there was a court fight here, and it's been deferred to the legislature, and it's ugly. But there's been a development. The Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled on the basis of the Plant Protection Act that all U.S. states, counties, and local communities have a legal right to ban or regulate the planting of any and all commercially grown, genetically engineered crops. And it's got nothing to do with the safety or science. It has to do with the Plant Protection Act banning the importation of any non-indigenous plants that threaten the indigenous flora. And it's certainly a very solid, valid foundation. Now, Monsanto, of course, is going to now start lobbying for the repeal of the Plant Protection Act because, by golly, you're going to buy their Frankenfood and you will like it. Because their goal is to monopolize production of all food on planet Earth, to do to the rest of planet Earth with their GMO seeds what the Federal Reserve was trying to do to the rest of the world with their ink and paper Federal Reserve notes. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Over at the CDC, now let me back up here with a reminder about William Thompson. William Thompson is a CDC scientist, and he is famous because he authored, along with some other CDC scientists, a report claiming that they had proved there was no link between autism and vaccines. This is kind of difficult to do, proving a negative, but Thompson and the CDC claimed it had been done. This report has become a curse on the families of children diagnosed as autistic because the pharmaceutical companies are indemnified from any lawsuits or civil harm their products cause. That goes all the way back to the Homeland Security Act. Instead, people who think they've been harmed by vaccines are required to file a case at what's called the vaccine court, which is funded by tax dollars, not the pharmaceutical industry. And the vaccine court was looking at all these claims coming on in. They had no idea the problem was that widespread. And so, citing this report from the CDC, the vaccine court has gotten into the habit of saying, well, we have this report from the CDC that says your child's autism couldn't be the reason for vaccines, therefore your request for compensation is denied. And William Thompson, I guess, had gone as far as he could, and he blew the whistle. He leaked it out that the CDC rigged this study. They cherry-picked the data to get the result they wanted, to cheat the families of children harmed by vaccines out of any kind of financial assistance, to save the government a few bucks. Well, it looks like there's another group in there. It's a group of anonymous scientists who don't want to be fired, and I think the only reason Thompson hasn't been let go is because he would have grounds for a wrongful termination lawsuit on his hands. So they're calling themselves the SPIDER Group, which stands for Scientists Preserving Integrity, Diligence, and Ethics in Research. And they have issued a public letter to the CDC's Chief of Staff, Carmen S. Viller. And what they said in this letter: we are a group of scientists at CDC that are very concerned about the current state of ethics at our agency. It appears that our mission is being influenced and shaped by outside parties and rogue interests. It seems that our mission and congressional intent for our agency is being circumvented by some of our leaders. What concerns us most is that it is becoming the norm and not the rare exception. Some senior management officials at CDC are clearly aware and even condone these behaviors. Others see it and turn the other way. Some staff are intimidated and pressed to do things they know are not right. We have representatives from across the agency that witness this unacceptable behavior. And then they go on to basically point out the reminder about William Thompson. Now, the CDC likes to pretend that it's just part of the government looking out for your own goods. It's like the way the Federal Reserve likes to pretend they're part of the government with the name Federal Reserve, but it's no more federal than Federal Express. The vast majority of CDC funding comes from the very pharmaceutical and medical corporations it's supposed to be keeping an eye on. When a society goes corrupt, it goes all the way corrupt. We're living in a society where the money junkie elites see you as nothing but a source of wealth. Now, wise rulers of a nation see the people as their wealth, and they take care of them. When you're demoted to merely being a source of wealth, you become disposable. And as long as they can sell you a product or force you to buy a product, which is certainly the case now with vaccines, and if some of you get damaged and killed by it, well, that's just cost of doing business. Seems to be the attitude that's coming out of these corporate boardrooms here. Now, Donald Trump is saying that there does exist a plan to completely replace Obamacare. Nobody's going to be left without health care insurance. And he says a big part of it in bringing the costs down is he's saying the pharmaceutical companies are willing to negotiate on lower prices. And maybe that was one of the reasons he put Robert Kennedy in charge of that Vaccine Safety Commission, because that's his hammer. Because if Robert Kennedy finds the indications that the vaccine makers have known all along that their products were causing autism and other issues, then Trump can come down on them with the full force of the White House. And so with Robert Kennedy in that panel, Trump's got him by the short and curlies. And we may actually see some real, genuine improvement in health care quality in this country at lower prices, as opposed to what we've had for the last 3 decades. And more than that, all the way back to Richard Nixon. The medical industrial complex is all about money, not about health. We could see a pushback on that. Now, a lot of times we talk about things like Manuka honey, nano silver, natural treatments you can grow in your own garden, and you know the medical industrial complex doesn't want you knowing about that. Their goal is to keep you dependent on their patented products coming out of their laboratories. It turns out German researchers have found capsaicin which is the hot compound in chili peppers, can actually stop breast cancer. There's another article that was put on up saying that people who eat hot, spicy foods tend to live longer. They're not sure why. Probably because it's a natural vasodilator. Helps get your blood into places where it needs to get, helps flush out the toxins. But you are what you eat. And if you're eating healthy, you'll be healthy. If you're eating corporate manufactured junk food loaded with chemicals designed to make you eat more, you're going to have poor health. But our current money junkie dominated society is all about making a profit, and if it makes you sick or makes you overweight, well, then we'll make more money from you, selling you treatments for your symptoms and exercise machines and health club memberships. It's all about maximizing profitability. Now then, as you know, the EpiPen was one of those treatments that was scandalized recently by all of a sudden the owner of it just cranking up the price ridiculously high. And this has opened up a door to rivals coming in with lower cost products, because the core ingredient in these EpiPens is not patentable. It's expired. It's considered generic. And so CVS is going to have their own version of the EpiPen selling for 1/6 of the price. It'll be $109 for a 2-pack of the authorized generic version of Adrenaclick, as opposed to the EpiPen, which goes for $600 a pop. Now, here's a bizarre story. Apparently over at Kitchener's wastewater treatment plant, this is over at the Grand River up in Canada, and they've discovered that there's a strange mutation going on with the fish, where the male fish were being turned female because of all the toxins pouring into the river. And they did a cleanup there and basically confirmed it was chemicals in the wastewater that were turning these male fish into females. Now, of course, here in the United States of America, the liberals are doing it to humans. Somebody wrote in and said they want to see a cartoon of, the gay dancers who are threatening to have a thing on Trump's inauguration, meeting up with the bikers. That'd be a lot of fun here. The Philippines are now going to offer free birth control to 6 million women. This on orders of President Rodrigo Duterte. And it's going to be opposed, obviously, by the Roman Catholic Church. Duterte is also threatening martial law in his crackdown on drug dealers. And remember, they've got a serious drug problem over there. He's trying to do something about it, and that's what started this whole argument with Barack Obama, where apparently Barack Obama loves drug dealers. Look how many of them that he's pardoned and commuted in these last weeks in office. Won't pardon Leonard Peltier. Won't pardon Manning. Drug dealers, get out of jail free card. And Obama went over to the Philippines and said, no, don't touch the drug dealers. Don't touch the drug dealers. And that literally ended relations between the U.S. and the Philippines. Now the Philippines is pivoting to Russia over this issue of how to treat drug dealers. It's another reminder of the deep interconnection between our government and the CIA's drug running operation. There's another article on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com where apparently there's a gentleman who's on trial for a serious crime, and he's now willing to turn state's evidence and say, I'll tell you who's doing it. And it's all in the CIA. Now, here's a very dangerous experiment. It's being reported over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain. And I have to wonder why they're doing this kind of research. But apparently, scientists embedded this laser port into mice at a specific location. And when they fire this laser into the brain, the mice stop acting like mice, and start acting like zombie hunters, attacking everything in their path, including bottle caps and wooden sticks. What is this research for? To make better soldiers? Take human beings, shut off their altruism and even their awareness, turn them into robots to kill? Now, there's another, let's say, I think we actually talked about this on Friday, so I'm going to let that one go here. Apparently, after Donald Trump's election victory, the State Department actually held stress workshops for all those poor staffers who really thought Hillary was going to win and they were going to keep their jobs. And it really does seem like the American people have been encouraged to not be resilient with all this microaggressions. In fact, there was a clip that was put up on WhatReallyHappened.com of Tim Allen from his Last Man Standing talking about PC and just how ridiculous it's gotten in terms of what you can say and can't say. And really, we've almost created a population among our young people of people who are just traumatized and disrupted by the most trivial and minor of things. And we certainly can't expect to go into a war against Russia and China with them. These people aren't even well equipped to deal with the real world of competitive business. What we're seeing here is the cumulative effect of decades of short-term political thinking and an absolute complete disregard for what was going to happen in the long term. Just like how last year when they were pushing race baiting for Hillary's campaign and didn't look forward to see those 4 black kids and the white kid. They don't think things through. And that is probably the greatest failing of the United States government for the last 3 decades. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today here. And we're talking about the race baiting that went on during the election to try and convince the black population that all whites are racist and the only person who could save the black people from the white racists was Hillary Clinton, who, although she was white, is the only non-racist, blah, 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 blah. These same corporate media prostitutes who were pushing that are now pleading with Martin Luther King III to attack Donald Trump on this claim that all whites are racist and you have to attack them. That's going to be a tall order because according to the Daily Mail, Donald Trump had a meeting with Martin Luther King III, which included a prayer session together. So it looks to me like they're kind of getting along. Now, story coming out of governmentslaves.info, as George Soros' plans for a global empire stumble badly, business CEOs are starting to rethink globalization. After all, it was economic globalism that allowed the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud to threaten and severely damage banks all over Europe and indeed around the entire world. And now they're starting to rethink that and say it may be time to put some of those barriers back up to contain disaster. Now, as you know, Planned Parenthood has been back in the news for still dealing with the scandal of buying and selling fetal tissue. But apparently, according to a report coming out of the House of Representatives, college labs are also trading in aborted fetal tissue. Apparently, this is becoming a feature of all abortion clinics and not just Planned Parenthood. And I think it's a little sick, and it's also a little hypocritical, because during last year's campaign, Hillary Clinton literally came out and said, there's nothing wrong with killing a baby up to the moment it's born. This in a country where if you damage an eagle's egg, you will go to jail. If you even touch a marine mammal here in Hawaii, it's a $20,000 fine. So why are humans disposable, especially white humans? Straight white males, all of a sudden we're discardable. We're not useful for anything. Very, very alarming. Story coming out of RINF.com. It's time to indict Clinton for the so-called Russian DNC and RNC hack. And it's basically saying no matter how they investigate how this information got out, it all comes back to the DNC. It wasn't a Russian hack. It was a leak. Even Donna Brazil is now saying there wasn't a Russian hack. They messed up. Either Seth Rich or Eric Braverman handed that flash drive. And if they did, they're heroes. There's the music. Time for us to head on out. I got to work on my throat. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, have a good evening. Aloha, America.